Hello, everyone. This is Nicholas Simone, and this is my presentation for the readings under the topic of curriculum improvement and development. So, my two chapters that I was assigned were chapters 3 and chapter 7. Chapter 3 was making curriculum purposeful. And whilst I really enjoyed the opening of this is probably the best part of the two chapters. He makes the argument that before you could even sit down and put together a curriculum for a school, there really needs to be a philosophy of what the school is trying to accomplish educationally. And he offers several techniques that schools can utilize to come up with some sort of a consensus from the broader school community on what the school philosophy will be, what the goals are, what the objectives are, and then the curriculum has to align with that philosophy. But I do think too often schools just put down a curriculum without really having the long-term goals in mind. And then while it talks about that, it says you should set specific goals for your school. And there is a section about the role that standards and test scores can play in the evaluation of a school's curriculum. And while he even talks about schools setting a goal of trying to increase the school's standing in the rankings, but he doesn't really talk about whether that's on the local level, state level, or the federal level. But he does think that schools should compete with each other, and that's a great way of assessing the curriculum. And I wrote more about this in the article, but that was the one area that I was a little bit critical of. I don't believe that the test scores should be used as a way of assessing the curriculum. I think really the success of a curriculum is determined years after kids have graduated from your school. But again, the whole point of this chapter was to emphasize that the process of developing a curriculum is not something that can be done quickly. I know in my school often they will put teachers together for 3 days and say, we'll pay you for 3 hours a day to work on curriculum. And teachers put things together haphazardly, and it's just not done really effectively. So this chapter really resonated with me very much as somebody who's taught for 26 years, because I think we need to uh, keep that idea of what is our philosophy and how does that align with the curriculum before we can even implement anything. Now, chapter 7 then dealt with the component of staff development. So the title was Curriculum Improvement Means Staff Development. And Wiles is very adamant in that the best of curriculums are not going to be successful or effective unless you have teachers who are willing to implement it effectively. So they are your first line. That you must have teachers buy in to what you're trying to accomplish educationally. And that's where leadership plays an enormous role. And I'll talk about that later in my discussion questions. So staff development is critical, yet Wiles is he's very honest. It's often unsuccessful. Teachers do not always react positively to staff development opportunities. So he wants to acknowledge that rather than just be critical of the teachers. He acknowledges that it's been in many cases a failure, and what can we do to improve on that? And he gives various strategies that schools could implement to improve the level of staff development in a school. He's One of the things he says is you can't just schedule people who fit into your time frame. He really doesn't think that we should have outside people always coming in. You should utilize your resources within the school. And he also thinks the best staff development is first going to look at, well, what are our needs? Don't just try to say, oh, I heard this person is good, or this person fits because we have staff development on a Tuesday and the person's available. You really need to say, well, what do we need as a school first? And then how can we address those weaknesses? And he does want teachers to be part of the process. He makes a point of saying that teachers want to be actively engaged in staff development. They don't want to just be lectured. They want to be listened to. They want to be part of the solution, that they are adult learners. So I'm really looking forward to having this discussion in our Zoom call, because there was a lot in each of these chapters that could be expanded on. Now, these are my discussion questions. So the first one I came up with is, to what extent should curriculum development be a localized effort? As I'm reading these chapters, and I did read them, I read each of them twice, it seems to be that Wiles is talking about on the local level, yet in our first section, in our first session, we were really talking about should there be a national curriculum. So what's the answer? Do we need to have local districts develop curriculum guides? Do we need it to be on the state level? Should it be on the federal level? I don't have an answer for that, so I'm looking forward to your expertise and experience to see what you think. Now, the second one, in what ways could those tasked with developing curriculum seek guidance and advice from those outside of the school environment? I think we were all interested in what James had to say last week about, not being a K through 12 traditional educator. Well, maybe we should be looking to local business leaders. Maybe we should be looking to people outside of education and see, well, what do you believe should be included in curriculum? What are the skills you would like the future members of the workforce to have when they graduate high school? So I thought that would be something we could discuss further. And then my last one, since staff development opportunities are often relegated to individual days throughout the school year, how can we schedule longer sessions, either before, during, or after after the student calendar? In other words, the calendar, we have teacher days, we have student days, and we have days that we're both obviously in session. And those staff development days are often, one in February, and maybe we'll throw one in March, and maybe one or two at the beginning of the year. But if you really want to do staff development right, you need a week or 2 weeks, in my opinion, to really get the message through to the teaching staff, and also just to fill in the gaps. We're still playing catch up with the technology. We saw that with this transition to remote learning. So many teachers were just not well equipped for it, and I'm so often a positive person, but in 2020, for teachers to not be aware of what Google Classroom is, that's an indictment on the schools. I don't believe that's the fault of the teachers. That the schools should have mandated that teachers are familiar with technology like that. So I would personally love to see teachers come to school 2 weeks before the first day of classes, where we can really have an invigorating, motivational, inspirational staff development session. But again, I know that there are contractual obligations that would possibly get in the way of that. All right, so why is this an important topic? Well, I like the fact that my two chapters, I really believe that they are linked tremendously. Curriculum and staff development are joined at the hip. You cannot have an effective curriculum without proper staff development. So that's why I feel like this is essential. What's the critical issue? Well, I found two of them. First, it's critical because schools are still using, I think, curriculum guidelines that just don't reflect what the economy and the American economic landscape looks like today. I don't even want to use 21st century anymore. It's because we're 20 years in. What students are being expected to learn does not always line up with what they're going to be needing to do in the workforce. Secondly, is I think it's critical because teachers are more and more negative, and this is just my own anecdotal experience, about staff development. And we just can't have that continue to persist. It's got to be the most exciting time for teachers. It's got to motivate them, to want to do great things in the classroom. And then I just ended with, this is difficult to solve because there's a lot of obstacles. I mentioned, contractual issues. We do have the issue of tenure. There are, teachers who have full job security, and sometimes it's difficult to convince them of the urgency of the matter. But that's where great leadership comes in, which is a topic obviously for another time. All right, what are the implications for teachers, students, administrators, parents, and society? Well, if we continue to fail, fail our students, they're just not going to be prepared for what life is going to face them after high school. So we really need to have effective curriculum and staff development to help our young people. And economically, what we all keep talking about, the gap between the rich and the poor is widening. It's been happening for 30, 40 years. I believe that the reason why the gap between the rich and the poor is widening is because the educational gap is widening. Some students go to phenomenal schools and some don't. And until we fix the gap in education, we're never going to, I think, address the gap economically in the country. And how would this inform my work? It really just particularly the chapter on staff development. I was really motivated by what Wiles had to offer. And even though I'm not an administrator, I have occasionally taken part in some staff development leadership opportunities. And I want to seek out people who are doing great work. I've been exposed to Ed Camp once, and I was really inspired by that. I want to go out there and look for people who are doing great things in the category of staff development. These are just three quick articles that I located. This first one was really about teachers' perspectives on staff development, but they used 16 teachers from Turkey in the study to do a qualitative analysis of what they viewed as effective staff development opportunities. Then the second article, it's quick, it's only 2 pages, but it really was interesting because it links how curriculum development, it really is all about what Wiles was saying, how curriculum development has to be rooted in the philosophy of the school. And then the last issue of educational leadership, the entire issue in September was devoted to teaching for the 21st century. So there's a whole list of articles. One of them is by Sir Ken Robinson. Tiffany referenced him in our class briefly. I hope you've all seen the video that she's referring to, because I find Sir Ken Robinson to be to me, the most inspirational educational mind that we have today. And that is it for my presentation. So thank you very much, everyone, and I will see you in class.